What exactly does it mean when people say that a video game aged poorly? Yeah, that. It's partially subjective, and increasingly so as time in the gaming industry moves forward. It's a pretty common trend on the internet to pick literally any game from the N64 library, say it aged bad, and most of the time, you'd be right. While most people would agree with you, if you tell someone who played Ocarina of Time as a kid that it aged badly, they might commit a murder. The flow of time is always moving the bar farther into what exactly a poorly aged game is. Some might say a game like Metroid on the NES aged poorly. You can't beat it without a map, most likely, and this type of gimmick was frequent in the era to sell magazines. Some may say a game like Pokemon Red and Blue aged poorly, because better games on the market simply replaced it. I personally have always maintained that Mario Kart Wii aged poorly to some extent. These graphics make me nauseous, and now that we have Mario Kart 8, it's certainly a relic to history.
But you can't say that, Jeff. The Wii just came out, except it's been 17 years. I know, it's weird.
Well, Wii games are old, we're old, we got 3 years to live, and I guess that also means that GameCube games are now fair to ask that question towards as well.
No, you can't do that. The GameCube, that's my childhood. You can't say that they aged bad. You can't do it.
Oh, the GameCube. It gave us such classics, and yet Nintendo acts like it never happened. But they'll sell us Clu Clu Land on every modern console for the 40-year-olds out there who I'm sure really care. On this show, we've already taken a look at one of the launch titles for the GameCube, Luigi's Mansion. The substitute for not having a Mario game at launch, but a serviceable little entry. There's no getting around it though. The console had a fairly weak launch lineup itself, but if you start looking at the launch window, meaning its first few months on the market, okay, how did this thing sell so bad? Two major titles released in the following months, Super Smash Bros. Melee and Pikmin, more or less de facto launch titles. Super Smash Bros. Melee was a sequel to Super Smash Bros. On N64, which aged bad. See, I told you. Pikmin was an all-new IP though, quite the risk, especially for a new console, and it took the world by storm, if you take away all but 1.6 million of the population.
So I already reviewed this game technically back in 2019 when I started the newer era of my channel. So you might be asking, why are we doing this again? Well, to be straight with you, my review of the first Pikmin game is by far my worst review in modern times. I only talked about the game for 9 minutes, and I could have easily talked about it for like 10.
After doing a community poll on my channel among the hype cycle for Pikmin 4 and looking at the ways I could do more Pikmin content, one idea I had was to revisit this game, as I especially have been feeling guilty about skimping on one of my childhood games the way I did. Life lesson for any new YouTubers, don't do weekly uploads. So we won't be repeating topics from my channel here that often, but this is just one that I personally feel I need to redo.
For my spiritual well-being.
However, to keep things at least somewhat fresh, we'll be taking two different approaches to this review that I didn't in that old video. Firstly, at the end of the review, I'll be answering whether or not I feel Pikmin did age poorly, as I feel it's an important aspect to analyze as we approach a new game on the horizon. And secondly, I'll be playing the original GameCube version today instead of the Wii version as I did back then, to give us a more unbiased answer. Although we'll still be looking at the two version differences, because I'm me.
So with all that aside, let's give Pikmin a fair look and ignore that previous review I did, please. Let's ignore it.
Starting up the game, we meet our protagonist, Captain Olimar from the planet Hakatate, or Hokatate. Name it what you want to. Okay, while doing that rant, we got hit by a meteor. I told you to focus on the road, Olimar. Well, we land at the impact site. This game's cleverly designed tutorial. The shallow view we have while walking around does quite a lot for adding immersion to the idea that we just crashed and we are lost on a mysterious planet, and is usually the first thing anyone notices while playing the game.
Man, where am I? Thought I was at the supermarket.
After bumbling around, we run into what's known as an onion. Yep, that's totally an onion. This onion spawns a singular tiny creature, whom Olimar has no clue what it is at first, and neither would you. He decides to name them the Pikmin, based off of a brand of carrots on his home planet. Well, one Pikmin alone might not accomplish anything, so we have to multiply, which we can do with the pellet posies, and later on, the corpses of the dead. Strength in numbers is key here. Olimar spawns just enough Pikmin to move a paper box, and eventually we run across our ship's engine.
Olimar, do you realize how lucky you are? If you crash landed anywhere else and that ship part was not your engine, you would be dead, buddy. Oh, that's so cute.
The Impact Site's first day is, in my opinion, one of the game's most genius moments. It's a tutorial, sure, but it's so much less obvious than most tutorials I've played in video games. Olimar uses his journal entries to candidly tell the player just how to progress. Now tell me, would you prefer that or a text box saying, "Pluck the Pikmin with A"? It's a good mixture of showing and telling at the same time, and I wish more games would take from this sort of design philosophy, because if I have to sit through one more 3-hour Pokemon tutorial, I'm just gonna turn the game off and not give it a chance. So here's the deal. Olimar has 30 in-game days on this mysterious planet to find 30 ship parts. That means theoretically finding at least one a day, which are spread out throughout 5 levels. Calling them 5 levels might be cheating though, because one is a tutorial, and the 5th is the final area with a boss in a singular part. But to be fair, the other 3, the main 3 if you will, are quite substantial levels with a lot to see and explore. To get the missing ship parts, Olimar will command the Pikmin, solve puzzles, build bridges, and fight goons along the way, all while commanding a battalion in a strategic fashion. It's quite a novel concept, and this idea for the Pikmin franchise can be traced back to Super Mario 128, a tech demo with a lot of Mario.
Did you also know that Super Mario Bros. 2, it was named Doki Doki Panic before it came to the United States?
Pikmin's development is fairly widely known by now and talked about every time Pikmin is even mentioned, but I had to at least bring it up. So yeah, Mario 128. There. This was not the only inspiration for Pikmin though, as the original idea for the franchise can be traced back to a game concept referred to as Adam and Eve, a game where the player would take the role of God. How do I always end up playing these games? The gameplay loop is as follows. You choose a level, and upon landing in it, you are given 13.5 minutes to collect treasure parts, raise more Pikmin, or both. Whatever you need to do, that's your business, not mine, okay? In the PAL version though, the days are stretched to 16 minutes.
Alrighty, well, see you guys. I am moving to Europe.
You do have to be careful as the day approaches sunset. If you leave Pikmin out in the field, they get left behind and are no longer part of your battalion anymore, which presents a really interesting question at the end of day. Do you want to spend your time maximizing every second and getting every treasure and enemy, or are you going to rescue those 2 Pikmin on the other side of the map? After recovering our engine, our second day on the planet takes us to the Forest of Hope. Immediately, our options are quite limited. There's grass that spawns nectar, which is a must-use for anyone playing Pikmin. It turns a Pikmin from a leaf Pikmin into a flower, meaning their speed and attack is raised quite significantly. If you leave one in the ground upon spawning it, funny enough, there can be bud Pikmin, which are circumstantial, but it's funny they even thought to add it. The main attraction in the Forest of Hope, though, is sort of this lattice wall, which is necessary to break down to continue our journey.
I never thought Pikmin would make me go against my values like this.
This wall, while just being that, a wall, is only the start of what this early part of Forest of Hope sets out to achieve from a game design perspective. The game introduces you to the inevitable elements of the adventure in bite-sized chunks. First of these is the dwarf Bulborbs, our Goombas of the franchise, and the kitty gloves come off as we fight a regular-sized Bulborb, far more dangerous. After that, a ship part sits out in the open, teaching the player what to keep an eye out for, and once we clean up that area, Olimar meets the second type of Pikmin, the yellow Pikmin. And right after meeting them, we learn they can pick up and throw bomb rocks and ultimately destroy another wall. And this is all in a straight little line.
I'll get back to talking about the Pikmin types in a little bit, but this stretch of land, the small Bulborbs into the big Bulborbs, into the treasure piece, into the yellow Pikmin, it's genius because this is essentially a tutorial. I mean, it's all linear, but it gives you the illusion that you have control. And I think that's genius because you may not have even realized that's kind of what it was supposed to be until now.
I can't stress enough how brilliant the early game design is in Pikmin. This is a crucial element we must look at when discussing if this game aged well or not. And I think it's a huge point in favor of the idea that it did. The developers created a smooth progression of a tutorial that fits with the illusion and immersion of being lost on a planet that feels more or less like regular gameplay and exploration, keeping the seasoned MLG gamers and casual players invested alike. Pikmin is on its surface an accessible game for everyone, except for people who like Pong only. Alright, well, we've done a lot. We've destroyed 2 walls. So, how exactly are we controlling it? Well, unfortunately, the controls is definitely one of the bigger arguments for why the GameCube game may have aged a bit rough. Obviously, you move with a control stick and can adjust the camera with R and Z. I like that this gives you the ability to make it a top-down game. It's really cute, because this is supposed to be a real-time strategy game after all. In front of Olimar is a circle demonstrating where exactly a Pikmin will be thrown, following the A button press. types. You may think this would control weird, and there is a bit of a learning curve, but if I can learn it as like a 7-year-old, I think most of you can too. I believe in you. Oddly enough, this game has 2 pause screens. One with a start button, which only brings up a few options, including ending the day early, and Y will bring up a map of the area with ship parts and Pikmin being shown after you find the whimsical radar. To separate Pikmin, you press X, which can be very hit or miss whether or not it works the way you want it to. Sometimes a few Pikmin cling onto you like a kid at a grocery store. Hey, leave me alone, buddy. Okay. Unfortunately, this is your only method of grabbing a specific Pikmin type. This is where our friend, the Wii version, comes in as part of Nintendo's new Play Control line. A series of Wii games ported from the GameCube sold to you with the same graphics and gameplay, but it now uses motion controls. Ooh, goody. Now, the primary function of the Wii version is the idea that throwing Pikmin has a completely free range of motion with the Wii pointer, which is a step closer to mimicking a real-time strategy game, pivoting back to the idea of using a computer mouse. The Wii versions of Pikmin are the preferred way to play the franchise, although this can be used to cheese certain puzzles that you just can't in the GameCube version. Alright, but we were talking about switching the Pikmin types. Pikmin 2 was actually the game that introduced switching between Pikmin on the fly, with the D-pads left and right. In the GameCube version of Pikmin 1, the D-pad does nothing. Besides taking a nap, get out of bed, Olimar, get out of bed. This means you have to either separate your Pikmin, which we established sucks, or swirl your party around until you get to the right type. Honestly, this is a massive oversight, and it does hurt the enjoyment of Pikmin 1 quite a bit for me on the original platform.
But by far, my favorite control is swarming the Pikmin with the C-stick, an absolute necessity in this game. On the Wiimote, this was swapped to down on the D-pad, which works almost just as well. The swarming is the #1 way to attack enemies, but is also pivotal for minute tasks like getting Pikmin on a wall or bridge fast and trying to balance them through tight paths.
Other enhancements to the Wii version while we're on the topic are the inclusion of rewinding days, which I don't like because, you know, that kind of defeats the whole point of Pikmin, but video games starting with the Wii era were legally mandated to be accessible for babies. Grr. There's also widescreen now and a few UI changes to boot, some of which resembles Pikmin 2. There was also text in the game that was changed to left justified instead of being centered.
I can't do this. I can't do this. They changed the text. How could they do this to my Pikmin?
Alright, let's talk about what this game was actually named after. The Pikmin. There are 3 types of them, and one of them barely does anything. I'm sorry, Yellow Pikmin, you know it's true. But it's a system that surprisingly works well nonetheless. Red Pikmin are able to go through fire, which is a huge benefit by itself, but to me, that's never been the most important attribute of them. Their secondary ability, though, which I think is major, is the fact that Red Pikmin do 1.5 times the damage to enemies in combat. When you're fighting hordes of Bulborbs, there's a significant difference between having dozens of Red Pikmin as opposed to the other types. And in a world that wants you dead as much as this one does, you're going to want that. Yellow Pikmin, as established, are the most useless type. They throw bomb rocks, which I personally have never liked as a gimmick, and it feels like they only gave them that ability because they had nothing else for these little guys. In fact, early beta elements would prove that Red and Blue Pikmin were meant to hold bomb rocks as well at one point, and eventually Pikmin 3 outright just gave bomb rocks to anyone who wanted one. Even these guys. The main purpose of bomb rocks is to destroy these walls of steel and darker steel. It just feels like it slows the game down. Bomb rocks as a mechanic also don't feel like they were programmed that well. For example, if you try to throw a yellow Pikmin that's holding a bomb to try to get them to another location, upon whistling them, they'll drop the bomb. You fool, you're gonna kill us all. Yeah, be careful with these, that's all I can really say. You don't want arson charges on your record. The alternative use of bomb rocks is to use them in combat, which is my personal favorite of the two. Take that, Pearly Clam. Ooh. It's quite effective if you know where to use them, and can take half of a Bulborb's health alone, making an attack easier if you only have blues or yellows, or are simply faced with an unorthodox angle for attacking. Besides that, yellow Pikmin can be thrown higher than the other types, which is barely used in the game, and that's the yellow Pikmin, the real breadwinners of society. The final type of Pikmin is found shortly after landing in the 3rd area, named the Forest Navel. These are the blue Pikmin. They can swim. I mean, what do you expect? They're blue. Well, they do have one other ability where they can actually save another Pikmin who's drowning by throwing them out of the water. It's gonna be okay, man. You're gonna live. You're gonna make it. I believe in you. Listen, I mean, this is fairly circumstantial, but I do appreciate the idea. It's funny, it's cute, and it might be kind of like an Easter egg, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So the thing is, if you know exactly not to over-prioritize growing yellow Pikmin, which to be fair, you may not unless it's a repeat playthrough, I do think this system overall works. At a very minimum, I would say the first Pikmin game is a lot lot more balance in the games that would succeed it. Pikmin 2 had the purple Pikmin, which broke the entire game, and Pikmin 3's rock Pikmin were kind of similar to that, albeit a lot less, and wing Pikmin kind of made the blue Pikmin useless. I think only having 3 types, even if the yellow Pikmin kind of suck, leads to a pretty simple and efficient system. The progression and order that you find these Pikmin though are almost more important to me than their exact functions, and that might sound confusing, so let me explain myself.
Have I ever not?
So at this point in our playthrough, when finding the blue Pikmin, you're more or less given 3 options for how you want to continue your journey. Option A is returning to the impact site, where having all 3 types not only helps us find one more ship part, but is a great place to grind all Pikmin. This is usually where I immediately head after discovering the blue Pikmin, and it sets me with numbers that usually last the entire playthrough. Option B is returning to the Forest of Hope, where blue Pikmin are crucial to getting the remaining ship parts and fighting a few bosses you may have missed before. And option C is just continuing to explore the Forest Navel, which has a lot to do still. I think having these options is excellent game design. Pikmin, which released in 2000 and gosh darn 1, was well before the prominence of open world games. Now back then, there was the occasional open world game you wouldn't dare let sit near your lunch table, such as GTA 3.
Don't worry, GTA 3, the Jacks peak in high school.
Point being, open world games existed back then. It was an interesting idea to give the player freedom and options. Gross. I'm sure if technology wasn't so restrictive, we'd have seen open world games from day one. Now, how does this relate to Pikmin, you may ask? And to that, I'd say stop interrupting me. Pikmin took full advantage of the GameCube's hardware, with up to 100 Pikmin being able to be present on the field at a single time, plus Olimar, plus Sheer Grubs. Not to mention, Nintendo didn't get around to open world games until, 16 years later. Very classic Nintendo. However, Pikmin, despite just being open area, almost resembles an open world game in structure because of these choices. Having the option to switch between open areas here is genius, as it gives the player a feeling of freedom without actually having to put the elbow grease in to do it from Nintendo's perspective. In a sense, this day system, and never needing to stay in one place, is the biggest favor Nintendo gave to the Pikmin franchise. You're quite literally on an adventure, and there's more than enough reason to check out each and every area. I already talked about the impact site and the Forest of Hope, so let's circle back to the Forest Navel. This level's incredibly dark, to the point where seeing a little bread bug walking around can give you a heart attack. The game seriously ramps up the difficulty here as well. No more Bulborbs, sure, but every enemy here is just as, if not more, threatening. This is the area that introduces the infamous Wallywogs, who someone out there has definitely fainted over seeing before. They take forever to defeat by throwing, so really, the only effective method of attack is to swarm them with a really large group of Pikmin. The Forest Navel also introduces fiery blowhogs. I actually think these enemies are really clever and present a fascinating risk-reward. I mean, you could try to carry back treasures among these guys as they spray fire to your blue and yellow Pikmin, taking a pretty big risk at the trade-off of time. Or you could be safe, go get red Pikmin if you don't have them, and that's how you can bring back the treasure safely. These are scattered throughout the base floor, and even then, there are risks with leaving red Pikmin to attack them, as some of them face water if you're not careful. The Forest Navel also presents 2 bosses, one of which is the Puffstool, who can turn Pikmin against you with poison. But the one I always think about when I revisit this game is Beady Longlegs, a really unique spider boss. And hey, an actual reason to use yellow Pikmin. I love how each of these bosses has their own giant arena. Like, 80% of this won't be explored or needed, but it helps with the atmosphere quite a bit, especially with the Puffstool. In general, Forest Navel is, I think, the most balanced out of the levels in terms of using all 3 Pikmin. There's the fire conundrum quite literally everywhere. There's the high up places for yellow Pikmin, and there's water, but not too much water. Speaking of too much water, meet the distant spring. The distant spring is giant, but feels a lot more empty, with endless amounts of water and not much going on. Look, I love this game, so I'm not gonna just say I dislike one of the 3 big areas, but I do think that this was fairly rushed and not that thought out.
Hey, we need one more area. Can you guys get it done? The game ships tomorrow.
I mean, adding to that feeling, there's even a recycled boss fight here in the form of the Armored Cannon Beetle, which is first fought in the Forest of Hope, accessible once you get the blue Pikmin. Granted, there are a decent number of unique enemies here as well. There are bull bears, which are more dangerous Bulborbs with more health. There's the puffy blowhogs. Okay, these guys suck. I mean, blow, they don't even kill your Pikmin, but they're annoying and always hanging around the bull bears. And to make matters worse, we got the bumbling snitchbug over here who puts your Pikmin up into the ground, and Wallywogs, but tougher Wallywogs. So yeah, okay, you know what? The distant spring is a gauntlet. Well, now that we're quite literally at war, I think we have to talk about the game's biggest enemy. No, it's not that. This is the crushing glitch. Essentially, even when an enemy dies, upon its falling animation, there's a chance that the Pikmin under the falling corpse will clip through the floor and automatically die. This is my least favorite aspect of Pikmin 1, and they didn't even bother fixing this in the Wii release. It's not just the enemies too. I mean, this doesn't happen as often, but your Pikmin can die just being under a bridge as well. I used to try no death runs in Pikmin 2 back when I played it like nobody's business, but the idea of doing a no death run in this game, I never even attempted it. I think it's essentially impossible. This glitch goes against every notion of Pikmin in my opinion. The challenge of this game should be from the regular combat and enemies. It's not fair to work hard to grind Pikmin, only to lose them to factors outside of your control. It's really unfortunate because I do think this is single-handedly the biggest flaw with Pikmin 1. Focusing on the distant spring again though, there's a decent number of puzzles here. It's not all combat. Some of these are just about using the C-stick to move your Pikmin through tight corridors, but some of it is just the same as other areas, like bomb rock walls and building bridges. Out of all the puzzles though, getting the Cronus reactor might be my least favorite in the entire game. To give a bit of background, there are colored candy pop buds that can change a Pikmin's color. Outside of this section, they aren't too prevalent, but here, they are required to shift all your blue Pikmin to yellow to get a treasure down, and then switch them all back, which takes all day. Literally, it takes an entire in-game day. I really admire the ship parts, no matter how annoying they can be to get. I'm looking at you, Shock Absorber. I love how each one has a unique Dr. Seuss type of design with so many moving parts on it. It's a very satisfying progression starting your journey with a hunk of scrap metal and then putting a Pokeball on it. Olimar will write journal entries for each one too. I specifically love his writings for the Libra, which was given to him by his daughter and named after her astrological sign.
Alright, let me tell you about the astrological signs because they mean so much. So, Olimar's daughter is born in October. We know that because she's a Libra, which means she's self-independent, she's rambunctious, she stands up for herself, and she likes mayo with her chicken tenders.
Similar story about the Sagittarius, which was given to Olimar by his son instead. They either reused the model for this or his kids have no creativity. All of this though adds to my appreciation for Olimar. I mean, think back to every Nintendo main character. Kirby doesn't talk, Mario doesn't talk, Link doesn't talk, Samus doesn't talk. But here we see the unique thoughts of Captain Olimar, who writes about his family and his survival. But on top of that, we hear about his day-to-day life. This is an average Joe at the end of the day, talking about his back pain with getting a massage machine, cooking some noodles. He's a surprisingly in-depth Nintendo character, and one of my personal favorites for this reason. In fact, this whole game's presentation is phenomenal. Now, this game wouldn't be up for any game awards. Even the ones that get nominated and deserve them lose if they're made by Nintendo.
But for 2001 standards, if you came up to me and you showed me this back then, I would have said that those are pretty good graphics.
Pikmin and its promotional art would use a more crude CGI art take on Olimar and the Pikmin, which I know was probably because it's an early GameCube game in part, but it gives the game a distinct charm that's admirable to this very day. Everything's a bit plasticky looking, sure. You couldn't replicate this in 2023, but you shouldn't have to either. It's a relic of its time, but held up quite well. I think one thing I really love about Pikmin is the atmosphere. I mean, there are slight hints indicating that this is indeed a place that humans once lived, but it's not in your face. Pikmin 4 looks to be a little more obvious with it, which I think is fine, but Pikmin 1 is interesting as art because you barely get those remnants. You get a little bottle and paper bags, but at the same time, it's very important to tell you that Olimar is extremely small, and the music is debatably one of the best Nintendo soundtracks ever, hands down. Hands down! If you ever want to forget about your life, turn on one of these 30-minute Forest of Hope songs on YouTube. It works for me. The music is a good mix between ambient-like and melodic, and I would kill to hear this with an orchestral team. Bottom line, the presentation might be a little rough around the edges, but I think it comes off as more charming than anything else. Graphics and music are all good, but something tells me Olimar doesn't care or realizes it. He wants those ship parts, and he needs those ship parts. 25 are required, and 5 are optional. It doesn't really make sense what's required and what's not. Like his kids' gifts, you know, little gems. They're required to take off. The ship literally won't launch without it, but a Nova Blaster to stop asteroids, a space raft to prevent him from drowning, you know, things that increase his chance of not dying. Yeah, those are optional. I never said Olimar was bright. Upon not getting 25 parts at the end of the 30 days, you get the bad ending, where Olimar fails to take off, dies, and turns into a Pikmin.
Rated E for everyone.
There's a normal ending if you have the 25 parts at the end of the 30 days, but upon getting all 30, you get a special, happier ending that reveals there are many more Pikmin types out there. We've only scratched the surface. Bulbmin, Winged Pikmin, Rock Pikmin, Ice Pikmin, orange. orange Pikmin. Wait, it's Oachi. All planned ahead. You gotta love Miyamoto. He's George Lucas. All right, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. How can we get all 30 parts without getting our 30th part?
Maybe I did the math wrong.
Meet the final trial. In size, it's about the same as the impact site, although a bit more linear. Here, you use the 3 Pikmin types in a pretty interesting obstacle course to get to the final boss, being the Emperor Bullblacks. Yep, a bigger Bulborb. No one saw this coming, not a single soul. I complained about this boss ad nauseum in my original Pikmin review, and I'm glad to say nothing's changed. I was right. I think it's an interesting idea in theory. Basically, yellow Pikmin are supposed to feed him bombs, he go boom, and then red Pikmin attack. But the yellow Pikmin sometimes just stand around and don't throw the bombs, so I always have to settle for them getting eaten instead, which gives a more brief window of attacking and is also just kind of sad. I don't want to see anyone die. Towards the end of this, I usually just get impatient. No, I didn't lose 100 Pikmin here, the footage lied. I think it's one of the weaker parts of this game personally, but still a classic boss fight nonetheless. It's funny I say yellow Pikmin are so useless, but there are literally 2 bosses that require them, and one of them is the final boss. Speaking of bosses, Pikmin 1 has optional boss fights, which all exist to give you nothing.
Thanks for more gameplay.
On the even number days, starting at day 8, we have the Mimuta, which I get that he looks scary. He's a giant stomping rock, but the worst he can do is attack Olimar. As for your Pikmin, he buries them, but actually makes them a flowered Pikmin. One thing that's interesting to note is Olimar can at least regain health if he goes back to the ship and presses A, which might be a necessity when you fight this guy, but also is just good throughout the game as well. There's Gulix, a giant mucus, which only appears on the odd number days in the impact site, starting at day 9. It's pretty easy. All you have to do is attack the mush. Moving on, the scariest and most memorable optional boss though is the Smoky Prog, who appears in the distant spring before day 15 only. This boss is brutal and maybe multi-dimensional because whatever Pikmin touches this void just instantly dies. However, the pearl this boss drops gives 100 Pikmin, so as long as you don't lose 99, you'll make a profit on their lives. I've never known how to beat the Smoky Prog without losing Pikmin. Some say to attack it when it yells at an onion, and that kind of works, but I think it's more or less a placebo. I have no clue how to win. But that's Pikmin. I mean, it's a short game, sure. There are some small things I didn't talk about, but I think its length works to its favor more than anything else. People like to throw the term tech demo around in its face a lot. Definitely something that Luigi's Mansion also dealt with. I personally do enjoy a good old 100-hour RPG, but not every game can have that type of content. Sometimes a video game has a story to tell, and it's only 5 hours long. Boo frickin' who. However, that opens this game in something like Luigi's Mansion to an idea that's special. The ability to replay them in an afternoon or weekend like an arcade game and maximize your score. As a kid, I used to work really hard to lower my number of days down. It's addicting, and no playthrough is really the same when you replay it. So yeah, the game may only be about 6 hours, but it's a very charming and memorable 6 hours. Before we talk about whether or not this game aged well though, there's one more piece of content we have to discuss. No, it's not the Luigi's Mansion demo trailer. A whole side mode exists, challenge mode. I didn't mention this once in my original review. Nice job, 2019 Jeff, you nailed it. Speaking of replayability, challenge mode is all about grinding Pikmin to the absolute limit. My gameplay might be kind of trash, but if you look at something like a speedrunner, the routing and logistics to get good at this mode is nothing short of impressive and insanity at the same time. I like this mode quite a bit. All 5 areas are playable here, and we get to see them at night, which is a nice visual distinction. On top of that, enemy placement's different, the nectar placement, even sprouted Pikmin. They're all different throughout what you'd expect in the single player mode. It's like, okay, it's a puff stool in the distant spring.
I remember when video games used to have standards.
There's nothing more to say, but I do love this mode. It's grinding Pikmin numbers, and all 5 areas are present here, but it's a really novel way to reuse some assets while still feeling fresh. I really am glad we get to spend a little more time in something like the final trial or impact site because they're so small regularly, and challenge modes from here would become a staple of the Pikmin franchise.
Well, I've run out of things to say, so let's ask that pivotal question. Is it gonna rain today? Did Pikmin 1 age well or not?
Well, yeah. I do think this game aged well, at least to some degree. Let's put it this way, I don't think this game aged perfectly. Some of the greater flaws though can be attributed to its development, the more rushed feel of it. But that's not really a result of aging, it's more so a result of the developers not being given enough time and money to make the game. However, the GameCube control scheme is the biggest thorn in this game's side. It's a pain not being able to choose what Pikmin you want, a huge detriment to the original product. If the Wii version was the original, no doubt, Pikmin would in my mind have aged nearly perfectly. But the original GameCube release, it's definitely more of a gray area.
So my answer is I'm saying yeah, instead of a yeah.
The reasons I'm gonna say this game aged well is ultimately because I think it does a lot that's quite ahead of its time. Some of the game design here, at least in early game, is peak Nintendo and peak Miyamoto. The writing is fantastic and is a great method of storytelling that we just don't see that often anymore. And the presentation, while not having held up perfectly, is still really good, although this could come down to nostalgia and biases. I'm sure the youth of today, after getting off their damn PCs on the highest settings playing Elden Ring, would play Pikmin and cry. But I don't know if that means Pikmin aged badly. It's not like the N64 where it's a bit tough to appreciate the graphics due to their blockiness and bad textures. Here we get decent models, we have textures that are a little gross, but mostly get the job done. We get the basics of what a game could look like even to this day, just heavily downscaled. I'm personally considering this game's graphics as a factor for why I think it aged well, but if you don't, I will find it in my heart to forgive you. Pikmin, in my opinion, is a gem and I fully recommend it. Maybe get the Wii version, but I do recommend it. As we approach Pikmin 4, it's crazy to me to see just how far this series has come. But let's remember that we wouldn't have made it to where we are now without the first Pikmin game. Someone had to open the floodgates, and Pikmin was the sacrificial lamb. This was a major trendsetter for not only the franchise, but new Nintendo IPs. I feel like games such as Wii Sports, Splatoon, ARMS, they're nothing like Pikmin, sure, but Nintendo kind of learned here how to hone in on exactly making something that appeals to different audiences, and I think Pikmin will have an everlasting legacy at Nintendo for being one of its more modern but retro franchises.
Well, that's Pikmin for you. I hope I did this one a bit more justice than I did for the previous video. I love doing Pikmin videos. They're very hard to come up with ideas for because I've already reviewed, all the games. But if you have any topics or recommendations, please feel free to tell me because I'd love to make more Pikmin videos for you guys. But we got one more person to ask whether or not Pikmin aged well or not. Captain Olimar, what do you think? Okay, I was just joking. Did you really think I was gonna do that whole cliche bit that all YouTubers do where the inanimate object comes alive and tries to kill everyone and
I'm gonna kill you and your whole freaking family, Jeff.
oh god, no.